Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Old Hunt, where we are still celebrating 10 years of Bloodborne. We are playing through version 1.00 of the Japanese release, and last time we basically got to the end of Yahar'gul. We sort of fully explored the surrounding area leading up to the main boss arena, and there's a little bit beyond that, but not a whole lot. And that's probably about as far, actually, as we're going to go in this episode. I hope you didn't come here expecting a great deal of progress in this episode, because we've got a lot still to think about, a lot of puzzles that still remain in Yahar'gul. I was sort of highlighting a bunch of the mysteries in the last episode. We're going to continue thinking about them, and there are a few more that we're going to get introduced to, and it's not like Yahar'gul is not the end of mysterious things in Bloodborne, but I do feel like it's sort of one of the high points, one of the places where you sort of get the culmination of a lot of aspects of the game that you've been engaging with the entire time. And I want to sort of come back to that a little bit after we've seen the boss, because again, the boss in and of itself is the culmination of some of those threads. So I want to wait until we've actually seen and engaged with the boss of Yahar'gul before I fully come back to that point. But even here at the start of the episode, I do want to bring up a few things that I failed to mention last time, and also that other people have been bringing up in the comments. I actually really liked when I came back from my break and was engaging with some of the comments, the thoughtful things that the people who've been following along with this playthrough have been saying. That was a lot of fun for me, and hopefully it was fun for them. It makes this playthrough feel more like it's just my own personal celebration. It is my own personal celebration of 10 years of Bloodborne, but I like having people along for the ride. That's why this is being published as a Let's Play on YouTube. So hopefully you're enjoying your time here along for the ride, and if you are and you're willing to engage and leave a comment, I want to try and engage with that going forward, because again, I had a lot of fun doing it last time. So actually the first thing I want to do, relatively quick correction, or rather not even a correction, just an addition to something that I mentioned in the last episode. When I talked about the pale blood sky note that, the director Hidetaka Miyazaki weighed in on and sort of explained that he sort of intended players to get that and it not necessarily make sense the first time they read it, and then after the revelation of the Red Moon, then you defeat Ram the vacuous spider, and then you can look up in the sky over Yahar'gul and see the true state of the pale blood sky that appears to be similar to the color of a corpse that's been drained of blood. And I was saying how that's sort of implied to have been the state of Yharnam all along. Well, there's a little bit more evidence that we can get for that, that's sort of tied in with the insight mechanic as it relates to how we perceive the world around us. And we've gotten a few examples of this already, right? Because you need one insight in order for the doll to even come to life if you ever want to level up. So that's sort of the most obvious and impactful thing that insight can do for the world around you. And as ever, right, the sort of implication is that as you increase in insight, the better your understanding of the true nature of the reality of the world of Bloodborne, is increasing, right? The better you fully grasp what's going on. But at the same time, it's also kind of paired with madness, and I think you're meant to question it a little bit. Of course, there is, and at the same time, right, there's also ways that having that knowledge is a little bit more dangerous than not having it, which is kind of fun, right? I think they do a lot that's very cool with that. But the thing that I really want to focus on is if you go all the way up to 60, there are various effects that happen sort of along the way. Including, the beckoning bell and the silencing blank that also happens at 1. In version 1.09, also at 1, you get access to the insight bath messengers sort of up there. You can sort of see them now. In this version that I'm playing, 1.00, you need 10 insight for them to appear, but as it stands, they're right here now. And then as you continue to go up, you get to 10. 10 is 1.00. For the Insight Bath. 15 is the Cathedral Ward enemies gain attacks and auras, and if you're going through Hemwick, that's when those enemies will start to appear out of the ground if it's nighttime. And of course, they always appear in the Witch of Hemwick boss fight, but they're not always there in the rest of Hemwick. At 40 Insight, amygdalas become visible. At 50 Insight, the Hunter's Dream music changes to this version of the Hunter's Dream, even before you fight and defeat Ram the vacuous spider. And you can also notice the messengers that pull the lever in the Cathedral Ward if you have the Hunter Chief emblem, sort of explaining that particular mystery of Bloodborne. But most importantly, if you get to 60, you get all the way, this is sort of the final world state change threshold. If you get to 60 insight, the baby's crying becomes audible as long as you're outside of the Hunter's Dream or the Chalice Dungeon. So if you're in the world of Yharnam, you can hear the same thing that you hear that I highlighted sort of in the audio of the last episode of the baby crying throughout the world of Yharnam, even though that baby's in a nightmare. And I sort of like to see this as like penetrating the veil of ignorance that was cast by Ram the Vacuous Spider. That could be totally wrong. I will say that. This is purely just the way I like to think of this. And it sort of implies that you're getting at, again, an underlying nature of reality, which implies the amygdalas are there the whole time. You just can't see them. The baby is crying the whole time. You just can't hear it. And sort of along those same lines, you could argue the pale blood sky is there the whole time. You just can't see it. Now, I do think at the same time as we get the reveal after defeating Ram the Vacuous Spider, there are aspects of the game that change in different like time states as you beat bosses, right? So after you beat, I think it's the Bloodstarved Beast, the like door opens, right? There's sort of a like an in-between stage, but when you start the game, it's like the end of the day, and then I forget which boss, it might just be Father Gascoigne. You beat him, and then it progresses to sunset, and then you beat Vicar Amelia, and it proceeds to night, and then you beat Ram the Vacuous Spider, and you get the revelation of the Red Moon. Now, how much of that is purely the removal of the, what I'm calling veil of ignorance, if it even exists, right? How much of that is the removal of the Ram's effect on the world, hiding all manner of rituals, as opposed to another progression in time, is a little unclear. It's unclear if there is supposed to be a progression in time or not as you defeat Ram. I think it could make sense that there is another progression in time, right? And these two things are linked, and so that makes it even harder to grasp, right? That might help us explain what's going on with the disappearance of the pigs in Yahar'gul, and also like the defeat of the kidnapper enemies that are now lying strewn about, and their corpses you can get the bloodstone chunks from, that I was picking up in the last episode. Like maybe that part of the transformation of Yahar'gul is tied to the advance of time to another phase of night, and the revelation of the things like the pale blood sky and the blood moon are a little bit more tied to the underlying state of the world that has been revealed now that Ram the Vacuous Spider is not hiding the various mystery rituals. That's possible. And the way that I've teased out those two like different effects may not necessarily be the correct way to do it if you understand time as defeating Ram to be progressing time and revealing the true state of the world. So that's a whole other like level of weirdness that I didn't really have the presence of mind to get into in the last episode, but I wanted to bring it up now because I failed to mention it. If you're interested in actually hearing the baby's crying voice when you get to 60 insight, sort of imply that that is an ongoing truth about the state of the world, Last Protagonist has done a lore playthrough where he deliberately makes sure to get to 60 insight as soon as possible on his first playthrough so that before he gets to Ram, you can hear the crying of the baby's voice. So I would recommend that. I'll see if I can link the playlist in some way in the video or the description, and you can follow along with that. And that's sort of it from sort of my little additions to the last episode. But I also got some interesting comments, and I'm going to start with Rune Esper, who talked about how the baths that I was talking about, right? So remember, we've got here, see the kanji here, suibon, right? Again, so associated with this sort of bowl or tray of water, which, by the way, I did find out it's sort of an alternative reading for a sort of like practice that's akin to bonsai in Japanese, except it involves using rocks. This is not my strongest area of expertise when it comes to Japanese culture, because I was basically hearing of it for the first time in the last, when I was doing the research after the last episode. And there's a term which is suiban, which is not the same as suibon, but it's used to mean sort of a tray of water that you would place these rocks in, you know, very intentionally when you're following this like art of visual like cultivation or whatever it is in Japanese culture. And suiban is like the tray of water that you put the rocks in. And you can, as an alternative to the suiban reading, you can use the term suibon. And I sort of like, look at this. This does not, to me, resemble the very thin, almost flat tray of water that you would use in this sort of rock placement art. I could be wrong. Again, I know very little about this, but I did want to say, right, because I was saying in the last episode that it might be just a made-up term. Might not be just a made-up term. Anyway, we have these bath things here, and Rune Esper was pointing out that it could make sense if you think of these things as reflections or reflecting pools. And as a sort of being, as an enlightened being, insightful being in the world, we have the ability to travel through these reflections. So we could understand, for instance, Bergenworth's Lunarium using the Moonside Lake as a massive reflecting pool. And you could then have the smaller versions, right? Because again, we go from the Moonside Lake ourselves to the one that's outside Yahar'gul, and then we go from the one inside Yahar'gul to the other one inside Yahar'gul, right? So we can definitely sort of move through these reflections. And then later on in the game, there's another boss that we'll fight who is able to sort of jump through mirrors. Although notably that takes place in a nightmare. So maybe that's some more like information as to how we can understand the world state of the Yharnam that we run around in. Perhaps that it is a nightmarish reflection of the true world as opposed to the true world itself. I don't know. Again, I've been sort of heavily considering that interpretation in this playthrough. Been very strongly leaning in that direction. There are a few things that still try and like pull me back from that a little bit. But that could be another thing that we consider in that particular line of reasoning. Anyway, I did want to bring up the idea that I like this idea of the reflection aspect because it sort of ties in with some of the other ways that we can move around the world that I want to come back to as we get further through this episode. Anyway, the other thing, this is relatively quick, but Martin Szigeti did point out that in Vampire the Masquerade, right, this set that I'm wearing right now, the Cain set, literally, has the word Cain, right? Cain instead of short for Cainhurst, basically. But I was saying like biblical Cain and Abel doesn't necessarily make sense. Well, Vampire the Masquerade, which is a role-playing game, features the like biblical Cain as the first vampire. And so that's how it builds its lore. And maybe, right, because I know that tabletop RPGs have had some influence on the creative talent behind the Soulsborne video games. Maybe some of that thinking may have gone into the creation of this playthrough. Maybe not. Maybe you want to keep that separate. I think I actually mentioned this potential connection in Translationborn and then completely failed to bring it up again in the last episode. So there is that potential connection. I'm not sure how much I like it, but it is there. So if you like it, you can go ahead and factor that into your considerations as to what you think in terms of Bloodborne's lore, how that makes sense to you. And also, as far as the like strangeness that we see on the streets of Yahar'gul, and this I think is going to lead into us getting into the boss fight here, is that we can sort of maybe understand the sight of Yahar'gul as the blurring of boundaries writ large. And actually, I want to go like into the world before I like really mention this again, because I think that's where it's going to be the clearest to sort of see how it's put together. And and again, I have a little bit of a choice, right? We could start from the like main portion here, or we could go to the Yahar'gul church, and these are both ways that you can do a run up to the boss fight. Let's see. I think I want to start from the church, and then if I happen to die, I'll show off the other route. Okay, we are back in the world, and I am very quickly going to run past the enemies that are around this area to once again... I should have shown off the fact that the other lamppost doesn't work. Well, I can sort of show it off in this world here, because as I come here, you will note this lamp has been, like, the lamp itself has been desecrated, right? The little bulb of light that should be there is not there. So it has essentially been permanently deactivated and destroyed, presumably by the 3 hunters that sort of took over this place in the interim from when we were kidnapped to now. And, all right, here we go. Here we get to do this crazy run. And this here, I want to get back to the point made by Big Gubosu. Actually, I was thinking I was just going to run straight towards the boss. And then I remembered I was actually trying to make a point. Oh boy. Please just get hit. Okay, thank you. That's more like it. Right, now, if I switch out to this weapon, I will slowly heal, so I can take a little bit more time to make a point. But remember, we come through these doors, and we have all these people in the walls here. We have all this strangeness. We have the bell ringers, who we just heard sort of loudly make their entrance. Okay, that guy can't shoot at me. We've got the cramped caskets that are shooting things at us. Got all this weirdness. And the bell ringing women, right? We've come across them before, and if you play the game online, they make an appearance in, like, places in the world of Bloodborne. Oh, great. It followed me. Alright, well, I dealt with that one a little bit more handily. But if you play the game online, you can come across the sinister bell-ringing women in the world of Bloodborne, but they're more prominently found in the Chalice dungeons. So we could potentially understand those bell-ringing women as sort of having come up from the Chalice dungeons, and they ring their bells and sort of summon things, possibly tie things to nightmares or dreams. I've speculated on that in the past. But, like, where do they come from? What's going on? How do we explain all this weirdness? Well, a very sort of, I think, high concept way of dealing with it. Again, Big Gubosu brought this up in the form of a comment, where we can think of the site of the ritual that's calling the moon, which was initiated by the School of Mensis, which is going to be down in the boss arena, where I am eventually going to go, but don't want to go just yet, because I don't want to, like, involve myself in that boss fight right now. We could see this as sort of the place where the boundaries are most blurred, because this is the, like, concentrated point where the moon is being called towards, the Great Ones are being drawn towards, all this stuff that's happening, all this calling. Maybe, and then just to finish the thought from Big Gubosu's comment, right, the intent, maybe, was to make it seem like the place around this blood moon ritual was distorted somehow, not just affecting what was, but bringing things in from other places, right? So maybe in calling the Great Ones, you bring things in from all these different layers of reality, things from nightmares, things from the chalices, things from all these different places are drawn to this sort of high arcane location inspired by the presence of the Great One or Great Ones, and the, like, thinning of the boundaries between reality and dream even further than they've ever been anywhere else, right? Maybe this can sort of explain, and I was saying, even in my own speculation, maybe, right, the nature of these people changed, because as they were running away, they get petrified. Also note, some of these people are in better states than others. I think this is another point by Martin Szigeti. You've got some people here who are, like, dressed up and running away, and you've got other people who look like sort of mummified corpses that are also in the walls. So maybe it was a combination. I was talking last time about how we have the people who are kidnapped and brought to be made part of the ritual and maybe sacrificed. So maybe some of those people were sacrificed and had something to do with the ritual, and they got petrified. And also maybe some other people who were just happened to be there got roped into whatever was going on, and as they were trying to flee, they were petrified as well. Also note that the wall itself, right? Like, there's this weird, almost sort of like muddy substance or whatever. It's not like the hard stone that is the wall. It's this weird sort of mud and this plant growth that has happened right here going up into the wall, right? So it's not just like they're part of the wall now. They're also part of whatever this, like, muddy substance is, which may or may not have something to do with the plant growth as well. It's like weird twisted force of life, maybe, from the earth. Interesting. There's really just more mysteries however you look at it. But I thought that was interesting, especially because we know that the main ritual is taking place in a nightmare. And it makes me wonder, well, was that nightmare already there, or was it somehow created as part of the Mensis ritual? because we know that nightmare realms can be created because we've been to the source of the hunter's dream. We don't know a lot about the process, but there is a place in the real world that looks just like the hunter's dream, and it's called, like if you look at the trophy, the source of the dream. So what's going on with the nightmare of Mensis, which, I mean, again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but what's going on with that place? Has it always been there, and was it shaped by them? Was it created by them as part of this ritual? If it was created by them as part of this ritual, maybe that's what's going on with all of these people, and maybe they need it, right? If we consider the final resting place of the echoes that are sort of like the souls of people in Bloodborne as the nightmare realms, maybe they needed to kill a bunch of people in order to arrange their souls so that they could reshape the nightmare realms? I don't know. Again, a ton of this episode is going to be me just throwing out random speculation about different things and not having any answers, and some of it's probably going to be contradictory. So there is that, right? And also, this is, I think, a good point to bring up the sort of final comment that I got in response to my last episode so far, right? I'm recording this fairly recently in terms of when the episode was released, so if you're like, hey, I commented on that episode, you haven't gotten to mine, well, I mean, the nature of this is very difficult to do, right? There's a certain timing where it's like, okay, it's too late, right? I can't, like, I only just got the comment now, and the video came out, too far in the past. And even then, right, I have to be very close to my recording date in order to get in the few comments that I already do. So if you've happened to comment after I'm recording this episode, I'm sorry. Anyway, the final comment that I want to bring up for now is by Rhetorical346, who's been sort of catching up, has caught up with the playthrough. Thank you for coming along and leaving your insightful comments along the way, and points out that this sort of, particularly with the cramped casket enemies, you can see that one sort of luring around in the distance there, maybe kind of far away. I don't want to get shot, so I've been sort of hesitant to get closer, but okay, here we go. This one that just shot like a body part at me, right? That one right there, right? These sort of enemies that we've seen them before, both in this episode and in the others, where they are like all these different bodies bursting out of these caskets, right? They are a way in which we can understand as potentially the church just messing with the dead. And so I thought this was interesting. Rhetorical writes that, the chained caskets to keep the church from getting bodies is one way that you can think of the stuff that you see sort of towards the start of the game, right? So if we go back, right, there are a lot of people, like, as you're running through the streets of Yharnam, there are all these graves, there are these caskets that are chained up, that are, like, locked in. Some people think, okay, they're chaining the caskets shut to keep people in. Some people think they're chaining caskets and putting graves in the street because, like, this is a nightmare and it's, like, reminiscent of the, like, dead everywhere. And some people think the chaining of the caskets might have something to do with protecting the bodies because people are going around and, like, snatching them. And the church, I think it's pretty clear, is doing experiments on the dead. And we can see this in a number of different ways, right? So to get back to the sort of wording of the comment here, the church has sort of been draining the blood of bodies for experiments, reassembling bodies into monsters, grinding the marrow into ash, and using other parts in rituals to explore the chalice dungeons. That's sort of like the gruesome, body parts of saints and things, right? So it's actively, like, the church seems to be actively engaged in sorting through all these different body parts. So maybe the people are putting these, like, headstones and things of their family in a place where they can keep an eye on because they don't like what's going on with all these experiments involving death. So, cool idea. I don't necessarily know. I think some of these things, and I mentioned this, I think, before I even started this, aren't necessarily going to fit into the same interpretation that everyone is going to get of Bloodborne, but I think they're all worth considering in one way or another. So, there's all the comments that I wanted to sort of get through. We're not done. We're not done, like, thinking through mysteries and weirdness. So, prepare yourselves. There's one more thing that I wanted to call to mind that I was touching on in the last episode. Maybe I'll be a little bit safe here. Where I was talking about sort of mechanical foreshadowing, right? Because there's foreshadowing in the sense of the story, which the game sort of hits you with the final boss of this area unexpectedly. I don't think they've really set up the presence of this particular boss in a very strong way in terms of the story thread, but they do set it up very well in terms of the gameplay thread. Because what do you have? You have these bell-ringing women who are buffing enemies in the first part of the area, and then you have these enemies that are sort of reassembled from corpses, like the corpse version of the Scourge Beasts and the cramped caskets, which again, like, there are all these body parts that are just bursting forth from the caskets that are no longer holding them as dead, and they're sort of clambering around and shooting, deceased body parts at you with these blood trails they leave behind, right? So you've got this sort of idea of these almost Frankenstein together monsters from different dead body parts, as well as bell ringers calling things, potentially tying them to dreams, definitely, maybe even causing them to be reassembled the way that they are, right? All of that's going on as you're making your way through Yahar'gul. And then we come here to the boss, and we are going to see sort of the culmination of all of that. Hey, look at this. It is a boss that consists of a bunch of, like, skeletal body parts fashioned together. Oh, great. Couldn't quite sneak around that limb. And sort of given new life, which you may or may not recognize it, but it is being buffed by these bell ringers who it's kind of maybe implied we're calling it in the first place, because I think you hear the ringing of the bells in that cutscene before you actually get to the reveal of this boss and its calling. So that sort of mechanical foreshadowing lets you know that, like in the first part of this area, Yahar'gul, if you want to fight the boss at its sort of most vulnerable, you're going to need to defeat the bell ringers first. Sort of a subtle mechanical hint as to the best approach to fighting this boss, which I think is pretty cool. And then also, of course, in terms of what we've been seeing in this area with the, like, reconstituted corpses and the cramped caskets and things like that. And once again, we'll see, like, it can, like, swing at us and grab and things like that. But the boss can also, like, drop body parts on us and things, right? So there's even a certain sense of, like, repeated mechanics where it's, like, throwing sort of blood and viscera around. So I think that's very cool. And in a sense, this is sort of the, like, culmination of the body horror of Bloodborne that I was talking about, I believe, in the last episode. Someone was commenting on how, like, again, I tend to associate Bloodborne mostly with cosmic horror and gothic horror, but, I mean, look at this. There's definitely some body horror going on, too. Also, okay, a few more things we have to talk about, like, regarding this boss before I really seriously take on the fight. Actually, again, I'll probably... It makes sense to be healing while I'm doing this, so I'll switch to my other weapon for the time being, because I'm not intending to actively fight it right now. So first of all, the name. Saitansha, right? That's the Japanese name for this boss. Sai meaning again, Tan meaning birth, and Sha meaning one or ones, because this is Japanese, could be singular or plural, and that's sort of the main point. This could be understood as a singular being, the One Reborn, which is the official translation, Or it could be understood as sort of multiple beings. So we could just call it the Reborn. Or maybe the Reborn Ones. But I think the Reborn sounds a little bit better if you're going to, like, call it as a boss name. But I kind of like the One Reborn myself, just because it does seem to be primarily animated by this thing's will. Like, and I think we're supposed to understand it as a single entity, even though it has, like, a composite nature. Right? So even though it's made of all these different things, I do think that ultimately we are meant to understand it as one sort of being. And along those lines, I do think it's interesting, because I was speculating earlier in this playthrough when I was looking at the blood dregs as to, like, what might be going on with sort of the story of what the Vile Bloods are hoping to achieve, and how that may or may not tie in with the other ideas about embracing children, right? Because the Queen of Blood wants to hold the blood within her arms. That's the dearest desire of the Vile Bloods. And at the same time, on the night of the hunt, when the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast, and possibly more, is blurred. And something about great ones coming close and embracing children. Maybe, if that's how you interpret that very ambiguous set of phrases. Again, it's a lot of guesswork. But I was sort of speculating about how this can sort of be possibly understood in terms of the quest for a virgin birth, right? Because we have, again, one form of virgin birth with Ariana's storyline and the presence of Erden, it seems like. Seems like a pretty direct implication as to that's what's going on. And my sort of version of explaining that so far that I've come up with in this playthrough involves the manipulation of blood as a medium for the sort of audio or other arcane wave-based sort of true form, if you can call it a form, of Erden, right? The formless Great One. So I sort of see Erden as a form of, like, energy waves, like sound waves, permeating blood, and then that would be able to somehow influence, through the means of that blood, Ariana in order to make her supernaturally pregnant, which is how that sort of storyline plays out. Meanwhile, you have what's going on with Vile Blood Queen Annalise with the collection of these blood dregs. And what are they, right? They are like the super concentrated form. Again, this is all my theory, my theorizing speculation stuff. The concentrated sort of life force that is imbued within blood, right? That's why the blood dregs are sort of so prominently found in the blood of the quote-unquote echo fiends, right? The hunters, who have the most blood echoes in their blood. The echoes, the souls, the, like, force of life that persists after death in their blood, that she is able to sort of consume the truest, rawest form of that essence in the form of blood dregs, and hopefully use those to bear a child of blood, whatever that means. Potentially just a child that comes from blood because it is constructed of the, like, reconstituted form of the life force of the dead. Well, take that idea again and consider the One Reborn here. What is it? It is a conglomeration of bodies that is given sort of a new form of life, it seems like, that is reborn in like a cosmic sense, right? Because we sort of get the moon implicated in the opening cutscene there. This is like on a cosmic level, a form of new life from all those forms of death that have been crushed together. Seems to me like it's almost a parallel sort of thought process to a child of blood conceived from the spirits of the dead that are concentrated within blood from the form of blood dregs. Now that could be complete nonsense, that could be absolutely nothing. I want to stress that. I haven't really thought through the implications of this. I'm thinking through all of this out loud. This is my first time really considering it in this playthrough of Bloodborne, but I do think that's potentially relevant because I like it as a way of tying together the various quests for sort of like a new form of life, a new form of being, like as a goal, and the way it works with the idea of the dead and their persistence. Okay, now let's actually get into the fight. When this guy sort of drops down here, I want to do... well, that did not go as smoothly as I planned. Do a plunging attack to get in a bunch of damage. Also, I wanted to test out something. I think this was also a recommendation from Rune Esper, where... Okay. I should be able to stop the blood drain. Look at that. Yes! It worked. Okay, I took a bunch of damage, so I need to get out of here. But I stopped the blood drain of the Lugarius wheel by ending the transformation. And you saw there was a unique animation for ending the... when there's the, like, body-based attack. You can see the, like, corpses falling through the ceiling there. But yeah, there was that unique animation which sort of emphasized the fact that I was ending the life drain effect of this particular weapon, the Lugarius' wheel, by transforming it out of its more arcane form. Interesting that it sort of involved all that sort of blood dripping over everything. Anyway, the way that it sort of makes the most sense to fight this boss is by repeating over and over again that sort of plunging attack-based thing. And it might not actually be worth it for me to transform this weapon, because... Uh-oh, I messed it up again. One of these times I'm going to get it right. Anyway. Oh, there we go. You do enough damage that eventually this sort of skeleton falls down, and that's... I ran out of stamina. That's how you do the most damage to it, is when it's in that sort of staggered state, and you can hit the, like, main body that is sort of directing the rest, because it takes more damage than the rest of the body does in and of itself, and sometimes you can get in essentially double hits, where you hit the sort of, you know, main controlling body, and you also hit the rest of the body, and so you can get damage to add up very quickly. And also, I can't remember if I fully completed this thought, but in between episodes, I checked my blood gem setup. I'm glad I dodged there. There we go. Boy, I took a bunch of damage from that. Okay. Uh-oh. I switched up my blood gems, and that means that... Well, that worked out when it shouldn't have. That means that my physical attack boost on the Lugarius' wheel here is, like, way higher than it was before. So I'm not even sure if necessarily the arcane boosting version of this, like, form of the weapon is going to be worth it. But could be, I don't know. Alright. Focusing back on... You know, I'm just going to run to the other side. I like the other side better for whatever reason. Doesn't necessarily make a whole bunch of sense, but... I just sort of prefer to attack from this side rather than the other. It's kind of weird, because I kept getting hung up on that particular drop. But, that's just how it is. Alright, buddy. Come closer. Keep coming. You can make it. There it is. Get a grab that you were too far away for. I appreciate that. We're going to get a sweep. No sweep in the arm. That's good. Well, I would have liked to have done more than 3 damage. That was kind of sad. Uh-oh. It's the AoE. Ah, it still got me. I thought I might get away from it. That's unfortunate. Alright. Let's actually go up this side again, because I like it better. There we go. Oh, boy. Got me inside the stairwell. Normally, you're pretty safe inside the stairwell. Not that time. Okay. Look at that. There's like 1,200 damage there. Yeah. Woof. Okay, that burst damage that happened around its legs was kind of ridiculous. Uh-oh. Get me out of here. This is maybe the hardest time I've ever had fighting this boss. I think it's because my weapon is +6. Normally, you can deal enough damage to this thing. Uh-oh. Normally, you can deal enough damage to this thing in rapid succession that you don't have to necessarily deal with a lot of its weird attacks and, like, second form. It doesn't help that I'm, like, not very effectively getting the... what do you call it? Oh, no, it did the sweep back with its arm. I was hoping it would just be a one-direction attack. Alright, well, I took more damage than I would have liked, but I also did some damage. I'm gonna get hit by that AoE. Yep. Yep. If I could have gotten out of range of it by dodging, it would have been helpful to dodge. But I don't think I could have. Whew. Dodging those weird pulses. Down to 7 blood vials. Uh-oh. It's here. You gotta get ready for it to sweep in both directions with that arm. I think it just did. Okay. Alright, let's heal up. Uh-oh. Got that stupid burst on me again. Get me out of here again. You know, maybe what I should be doing... Uh-oh. This is a dead end. I do not want to be in a dead end. Oh, finally. An AoE that I did not just tank. Whew. Okay. Is this also a dead end? I need to reorient myself. I don't know where I am. What's going on? Why am I so horribly lost? Oh boy. Yeah, maybe I'll just attack it down here for a little bit. As long as I keep moving. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Should be doing okay. I'm liking the way this health situation is playing out. I think I've somehow gotten, like, completely turned around. Because I'm trying to get up to the second lever. Second lever. Listen to me. And I'm not being successful. I think this is it. Here we go. Alright. It's probably my terrible sense of direction that's doing all this for me. Alright, here we go. Now that we're back up on the second level here, should hopefully... Uh-oh. Taking too much damage. Alright. Uh-oh. It's gonna come back. Dodged it again. Took a little bit of damage from that. I'll take it. 715 damage. Uh-oh. Yep. Yep, I knew it was coming. Down to my last blood vial, huh? Ah. It's so big, and yet it dodged. Alright. No more healing for me. But I'm at full HP, and it is very low. Uh-oh. Attack one more time! Attack one more time! Yes! Whew! Unbelievable. Whew, baby. Okay, we've defeated the One Reborn. That was a lot closer than it should have been. All right. Whew, okay. We've accomplished a lot with this episode, but there is yet more that I want to cover. So, here we go. This shouldn't take too long, but we've considered in all of this, right? I mentioned that this is sort of the culminating point for a lot of different threads that we've been engaging with in Bloodborne. We've considered the weirdness of the reflections and the pools of maybe water, maybe not filled with water. What do they have to do with anything? Well, I want to come back to the idea of how we move around in the world of Bloodborne, because from the beginning of the game, let me find the appropriate. Nope, it's going to be a consumable, even though it's not consumed. We're going to look for the monocular. Here we go. We're going to use this. We've been using these lampposts to warp to and from the dream, like right from the start of the game. And I want to bring this up now because, again, this is a little bit of the culmination of this sort of thing, because you get all of the bell ringers that have their attacks. Notice at the top of the lantern we have these bells, right? And you have the bell ringers, and you have the sort of corpse themes, and you have the like reflecting pools. All these are different ways of getting around. And I'm not really sure, like, I got a comment, it was a long time ago now, mentioning how nobody really talks about how we get around in the world of Bloodborne. They just sort of accept the logic. And I don't think I'm going to satisfy the, like, intent behind that comment, because I don't think I have a great explanation for how we get around in the world of Bloodborne. But again, I do think it's interesting to think about. And if you know some of the history of the game's development, you'll know that there used to be this idea of warp chairs, and that connection to the dream is fairly straightforward, right? There's a chair, and if you look at the animation, the character like sits down in the chair, it sort of puts their head into a position where they could fall asleep, and then they warp into the dream, right? So they go asleep in one part of the world, they wake up in the hunter's dream. The logic behind that is pretty straightforward. A lot of people are huge fans of the warp chairs. I think it's a cool idea, but I'm a little bit more attached personally to these lampposts, and I don't know if I have a great way of like putting into words why, but just this idea of, right, because they start out empty. So as you're going around the world, it's like you are bringing light to these different places, and that light can sort of be taken for like the light of reason, the light of understanding, right? You beat a boss, you gain access to this lamppost, and then you activate it, and that is sort of like the light of your understanding, maybe. And it's kind of tied in with the idea, right? Also the idea of vision, right? Just very, like, obviously it's sort of like a candle representing illumination and vision, right? And then the bells representing sound. Scent also obviously plays a major factor in the game, right? You have the unique scent of a hunter that is different from the scent of blood and beasts, right? And which I've speculated is a relation of, like, us being tied to the nightmare, right? To sort of smell the dream on us, and us being essentially from the other side. And I like this idea of sort of the bells standing in for like both sound and penetration to other things, right? Because this is something I've been getting, I think it was Rhetorical as well here, who'd been talking about some of the implications of bells throughout the game, because there are certain enemies that have bells around their necks that seem to have come from the Chalice dungeons, and maybe those bells are like placed there as a means of either controlling them or maybe just fastening them to the places where they are to work for the Healing Church. Maybe, I don't know, but you definitely associate bells with the summoning, right? With the calling even of the One Reborn, but also of the enemies, and potentially being tied to like other worlds, right? There are all these different associations with bells, and also with collaboration, right? Because the sounds of bells like calls people to you, they allow you to cross the gaps between worlds, and then you use the silencing blank, right, which ends that resonance and sends people home. In terms of the like collaboration. And this really works with the sort of diffuse idea of bells. I did some very, very basic research into like bells in like Christianity and Shinto and Buddhism, and there are different nuances to their instantiation in each one of those sort of belief systems, but all of them sort of have a unique commonality around the idea of bells call people together, because literally they would be used as signals for people to gather. Bells sort of drive out evil influences, and almost an otherworldly association as well, right? That they ring not just in this world, but also in other worlds. Whatever that particular belief system versions of it is. Now, again, this was very surface level research, but I do think there's something about that idea that could fit in with the understanding of just a lot of people in general, where you have bells like crossing world gaps and calling people together and things like that. Also, I think it's interesting to think of the different ways, and I specifically want to bring this to mind before I go a little bit further, because I want to think about, again, how we get to and from, right? We have the lanterns, which, okay, maybe they're not as directly making sense as the as the warp shares did in terms of how we get to the dream from them, but maybe that's what the bells have to do, and the like candles, the lamps, represents the light of our understanding as we illuminate the world as we go around through it. Maybe not. Also, it's potential, right? Maybe like you cover the light of the candle, and that's how you go into this sort of dream state. Maybe. I don't like that very much, but it maybe could be what's going on. But the lampposts aren't the only way, right, that we get around in the world of Bloodborne. There are a couple other ways. One, obviously, the big flashpoint one in Yahar'gul are the baths, right? And actually, maybe it makes sense for me to go to the dream. So I'm going to get out of the monocular because I want to sort of highlight this in particular. And also, it'll help me to have a little bit more HP. So I'll see you in the dream where I'll get on with this point here. Right, so I touched on this already, but we have these baths, these suibon, right? These trays of water, essentially, right? And they're tied to the messengers, but also in Yahar'gul, we can teleport between them. Maybe that has to do with reflections, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But one way or another, we can use those as a means of getting around. And we also have the example of the Moonside Lake, right? So that's another way that we can move around in Bloodborne. It's tied to this sort of small collected pool of water. Another way that we get around in Bloodborne, we have sort of a double association here, because we have graves and we also have chalices, right? And you can see the chalices on the altars here, right? And look at this particular chalice, right? The sort of wide brim of the cup here, of the chalice, looks a little bit like a small version of this, doesn't it? Right? And I don't know if this is, I don't know necessarily how intentional this is, but you do have these chalices, which are sort of even smaller ways that you can pool liquid. And this could be nothing. I'm going to say this again. I feel like I need to emphasize this multiple times, but this could be nothing at all. I am not tying all this into an existing belief system of mine about Bloodborne. I am just speculating. And some of the speculation that I have, I'm sure, is going to be contradictory, but I like throwing out the ideas. So note here that we have the chalices as a way of collecting liquid, in this case almost very commonly blood, right? Because we get this stuff here, right? The ritual blood, which is incoagulable blood. This is sort of like the bedrock item that we need in order to explore the chalices. And as we'll see, you can, the spirits of the dead will slowly, as you get more potent with the ritual blood, rise ever further out of the ritual blood, right? So you have this association with the chalices, which, by the way, Seihai literally is holy cup, but this is also the term that gets used for the Holy Grail. So these are grals in that sense as well. These vessels for holding these things, and of course you also get tomb mold that you put inside these things. You also get various body parts of saints and relics and things, right? These all get mixed in. So it's not purely a form of liquid, but it's also it's tied with death. So you have these forms of liquid that are tied with death, and these are how you warp into the chalice dungeons. And now maybe that influences your understanding of the chalices as being sort of nightmare realms as opposed to the physical places underneath Yharnam. The game sort of gives you contradictory information on this. On the one hand, everyone talks about the Tomb of the Gods carved out below Yharnam. You could maybe get a physical entrance to it from the place outside Bergenworth College. That may have been how the Bergenworth scholars themselves got down there. There does seem to be a physical location underneath Yharnam that is the Chalice Dungeons. The ones we go to, are those the same? We sort of get some repeat bosses. We get some sort of effects that aren't necessarily the most easy to understand if we're accepting all of these places as true. It's possible that we go to dream versions of real world underground Tomb of the Gods, right? And that in conducting these chalice rituals from the dream, we're not necessarily going to the physical chalice dungeons, but dream versions of them. And that could explain maybe how we go back in time, essentially, because that's one of the things that seems to happen as you go deeper into the chalices. Maybe not. Again, chalices, I know almost nothing about how they're supposed to fit into the lore. I know a lot of that goes around them. I like to think about them, but as far as how they fit into the world, picture of Bloodborne, if you're going to put everything onto these different planes of reality, I have no idea how that goes together. But I do think it's an interesting potential connection for how we get around the world, especially because it brings us a tie to the other thing, right? It's not, you can't just put these anywhere, these chalices anywhere, and start teleporting around the world of Bloodborne. You also have an association with graves, right? So there's that going on as well. And now I want to go back to where I left off, the Plaza of Rebirth, right? Very literally. Advent Plaza, I think, is the official translation, which sounds great, right? Because it's like the place where a god has come among mortals, right? Literally in the Japanese, we're getting like the Rebirth Plaza. Saitan, again, Saitan Sha, the One Reborn, or just the Reborn, Saitan Rebirth, and then Hiroba is Plaza. And so anyway, we're going to go there, and I want to continue this thought of the graves. Okay, so again, ways we get around Bloodborne. Lanterns, in this world in particular, they take us to the dream, and they sort of tie the world together. It's a little bit unclear how real or not real they are. And they've got the bells atop them, which sort of possibly lends them an otherworldly sense, right? They've got sort of an underlying logic, not as straightforward as warp chairs, but I like them. I think they're like a cool symbology in their own right, or they have that. But also, we get around via large bodies of water, or maybe just the reflections, because the pools, the trays that we go in that teleport us around Yahar'gul are not filled with water. They are like empty of water, but the reflections are still there, so maybe it has something to do with the reflections. Also, we saw the chalices potentially as small gatherings of pools of water, sort of like the baths that the messengers are present in. So maybe they are also working on the reflection principle, maybe not, but they are also noticeably tied with death. And what do we have in here? We have more of these figures with these weird cages on their heads. They're all in this sort of mummified corpse state. And as we come back here, we get to sort of the main one, and we get a prompt, which is investigate mummy, right? So very straightforwardly, we can see what's going on with this particular mummy, but watch what happens when we do. We are back in the lecture hall, which we know is adrift in the nightmare, but moreover, we are in the second floor of the lecture hall, where we've never been before. So we've gained new access to a nightmare. And it's interesting to think of how we got here, because we sort of embraced a mummified figure, and it almost looks, the way we sort of crouch down and put our head near his, it almost looks like we're going into his nightmare or his dream. Is that actually what happens? I don't know. That's a lot to read into a visual gesture. I'm not a very visual person. But maybe that has something to do with what's going on? And it's just interesting to think of, because again, we also have that tie to death and transportation. The mummified version of that person appears to be dead, and we interact with it and find ourselves in a nightmare. Nightmares are sort of afterlives in Bloodborne. So there is sort of a logic to how we get around here. And then, of course, we're greeted first things first with a lamppost where we're able to sort of activate, by this thing. And, of course, messengers also are associated with the motion between all these different worlds, right? They're everywhere. They're in the chalices, they're in the nightmares, they're in even the real world, right? They pull the lever, if that's the real world, right? That might also be another nightmare, the main world of Yharnam, right? Might be the just sort of closest nightmare reflection of reality. Maybe like a nightmare sort of, I've speculated before about nightmares interpenetrating with reality. So maybe the main world of Yharnam is reality, but it's been interpenetrated with a nightmare realm because it's the night of the hunt. And that sort of is able to make it both reality and a nightmare sort of realm in its own right. And that might have something to do with why we have lampposts around there. I don't know. I don't know. Very mysterious, lots of strange stuff going on, but we've gone very long for an episode of The Old Hunt, and we've had a lot of brain-bending things to consider. I don't even know if all of this adds up, but I want to go back to the dream and just sort of regather my thoughts, do a little bit of leveling up, and refocus on a different direction. We're going to let this particular path through Bloodborne lie for a little bit, and we're going to pick up and start going to a different sort of optional area, but one that is also sort of rich with information and other potential things. We have to do it if we want to get our arcane rifle spear to be any good anyway. So that's where we're going to end up heading. I hope you've enjoyed sticking with me through this extra long episode, through this font of speculation and weirdness. Hopefully I haven't, fully alienated the people who care about following along with this playthrough. It's been fun for me to do all this speculation and stuff, but I'm going to be excited just to go back to running around in the world of Yharnam again and not necessarily having to break my brain around all the strange mysteries. Yahar'gul, like I said, really is an intense focal point for a lot of the mysteries of Bloodborne. And there are mysteries that still remain, but boy, like Yahar'gul, it does my head in. It does my head in every time. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed following along with me. There might be a little bit of a jump in between episodes, like I was saying. I would go back to the dream to say farewell, but because I think it's a little bit less of a jump if I sort of start there rather than other places. But this episode, I feel like, has gone on long enough. I'm just going to call an end to my hunt for the evening, and whenever I see you again, I wish all of you in the meantime, good hunting.